Imagine a room where the air is so thick with another person's oxygen that you have forgotten how to breathe for yourself. This was the quiet suffocation of Elias, a man who believed that loving his wife, Sarah, meant becoming her literal emotional shadow. Every time Sarah sighed in the kitchen, Elias felt a sympathetic pang of anxiety in his own chest before he even knew what was wrong. He had spent years meticulously curating his existence to be the perfect emotional shock absorber for her every whim and worry. If she was frustrated with work, he would spend his entire evening pacing the living room, mentally drafting her resignation or her defense. If she was silent, he would interpret that silence as a personal failure, a void that he needed to fill with frantic conversation or physical proximity. He thought this was the definition of a soulmate, a beautiful merging of two spirits into one singular, inseparable entity. But in reality, Elias was no longer a person. He was a mirror, reflecting her moods back at her until the original version of himself had faded into a grey blur. The tragedy of their relationship wasn't a lack of love, but an excess of it that had turned into a form of psychological imprisonment. Sarah didn't feel cherished by his constant hovering. She felt hunted by an invisible pressure to always be okay so that he could be okay. The more Elias tried to close the gap between them to ensure security, the more Sarah felt the walls of their home closing in on her spirit. One Tuesday evening, the tension finally snapped when Sarah asked for a simple hour of solitude to read a book in the bedroom. Elias felt a cold spike of panic, wondering what he had done wrong and why his presence was suddenly a burden to the woman he adored. He sat on the sofa, staring at the closed door, feeling like a ghost that had been banished from the only world it knew how to inhabit. This is the enmeshment trap, a modern epidemic where we mistake total access for intimacy and constant proximity for true connection. In our hyper-connected world of 2026, we are told that being a good partner means being reachable, readable, and relatable at every single second. But as Elias sat in the silence of his living room, he was forced to confront the terrifying reality that he had no internal world left of his own. He had traded his autonomy for a false sense of security, and in doing so, he had become a weight that Sarah was struggling to carry. Strategic detachment is not the act of leaving. It is the act of standing still so that the other person can finally see you again. It is the realization that a relationship is not a fusion of two halves, but a partnership between two whole, distinct, and sovereign individuals. When Elias began his journey toward detachment, he had to learn how to build a psychological perimeter that protected his own peace. He had to understand that Sarah's bad day at the office was not a wildfire he was required to run into without a protective suit. By creating a buffer zone, he allowed her the dignity of processing her own emotions without the added burden of managing his reaction to them. This shift is what neuroscientists call the reset of the reward system, where space creates the necessary vacuum for desire to rush back in. If you are always there, always available, and always predictable, you become a background noise that the brain eventually tunes out. The human mind is wired to seek out the unknown, the mysterious, and the slightly out of reach, which is why distance is a vital aphrodisiac. Elias started small by reclaiming his Saturday mornings, leaving the house without a plan and without checking his phone every 10 minutes. At first, the silence was deafening, a physical ache in his chest that screamed at him to return to the comfort of his enmeshed habit. He felt like a sailor who had lost sight of land, drifting in an ocean of his own identity that he hadn't navigated in over a decade. But as the weeks passed, the panic was replaced by a burgeoning sense of curiosity about who he was when no one was watching. He rediscovered a love for old architecture, spending hours walking through the city and sketching the lines of buildings Sarah never liked. He realized that by having his own narrative, He was becoming a more interesting person to talk to when he finally returned home. When he walked through the front door now, he wasn't looking to Sarah to validate his existence. He was bringing his existence back to her. Sarah noticed the change almost immediately, seeing a spark in his eyes that had been extinguished by years of desperate clinging. She no longer felt the need to manage his emotions because he was finally taking responsibility for the climate of his own mind. This is the observer effect in action, where stepping back allows you to see the relationship from a higher vantage point of clarity. Instead of being caught in the emotional storm, Elias became the meteorologist, watching the clouds move without letting the rain drench his soul. He learned that he could witness her pain with deep empathy while still maintaining the integrity of his own emotional boundaries. Selective engagement became his new superpower, allowing him to choose which battles were worth his energy and which belonged to Sarah alone. This isn't coldness. It is the ultimate form of respect, acknowledging that your partner is capable of handling their own internal life. By refusing to jump into the quicksand with her, he was finally able to stand on solid ground and offer her a hand to pull her out. The energy between them shifted from a heavy, stagnant pool to a dynamic current that flowed between two distinct and sturdy banks. In the digital age, we are constantly triggered into a smothering response because we have lost the art of being alone together. We use our phones as digital umbilical cords, checking in until the checking in becomes a chore that kills the joy of a real reunion. Strategic detachment requires the courage to put the phone down and trust that the relationship is strong enough to survive a few hours of silence. It is the understanding that the gap between two people is not a void to be feared, but a space where growth and longing can flourish. Elias found that the more he pursued his solo goals, the more magnetic he became to the woman who had once felt suffocated by him. His independence was an invitation, a signal that he was a person of value who didn't need her to survive, but chose her to thrive with. This is the difference between the needy energy of survival and the powerful energy of a deliberate and conscious partnership. When you are whole on your own, your time together stops being a default setting and starts being a high-value gift. The return to center technique became Elias's anchor, a way to reclaim his composure whenever the old habits of anxiety started to creep back in. He would pause, breathe, and remind himself that his perimeter was sacred and that his peace was his own responsibility. He stopped asking for permission to have an opinion and started trusting the internal compass that had been buried under years of people-pleasing. Sarah responded by leaning into him more, drawn to the strength of a man who could stand on his own 2 feet without leaning on her. They moved from a state of codependence, where they were to drowning people holding on to each other, to a state of true interdependence. Interdependence is the gold standard of modern romance, where 2 separate perimeters create a shared sanctuary of mutual respect. It is the beauty of 2 people who don't need each other to be complete, but who find that life is infinitely richer when shared. Elias realized that, by pulling away, he hadn't lost Sarah. He had actually found the version of her that he had been missing for years. He could see her beauty, her flaws, and her brilliance more clearly now that he wasn't looking through the distorted lens of his own insecurity. Strategic detachment is the secret mechanism that prevents the burnout of attraction and turns a fragile bond into a resilient fortress. It requires us to dismantle the fallacy that constant proximity is the only way to prove our loyalty and our love to another. In fact, the most loyal thing you can do for your partner is to remain a person they can actually admire and respect. You cannot admire someone who has no boundaries, just as you cannot respect someone who has sacrificed their entire identity for you. By maintaining your own psychological perimeter, you ensure that there is always something new for your partner to discover and explore. The art of distance is what allows the flame of desire to have the oxygen it needs to burn bright across the decades of a long life. Elias and Sarah's home transformed from a place of quiet resentment into a laboratory of individual and collective evolution. They learned to communicate through scripts of invitation rather than scripts of rejection, framing their needs as a way to enhance the bond. When Elias said he needed a weekend away with his friends, he wasn't saying he didn't love her. He was saying he loved her enough to stay healthy. He was investing in the version of himself that Sarah fell in love with, the adventurous, autonomous man who had his own dreams. We must all learn to sit with the discomfort of our own company before we can truly be a good companion to someone else. If you are using your relationship to escape the boredom or the pain of being yourself, you are setting that relationship up for a slow death. Strategic detachment forces you to face yourself, to heal your own wounds, and to build a life that you are proud of, regardless of your status. Only then can you enter the shared space of a relationship with a hand that is open rather than a fist that is clenching. The power of autonomy is that it removes the fear of loss, because you know that you are a complete entity even if the relationship ends. Ironically, this lack of fear is exactly what makes the relationship more likely to last, as it removes the pressure that leads to explosions. Elias no longer felt like he was walking on eggshells, because he knew that his happiness was not tethered to Sarah's every passing thought. He was free to love her without the hidden agenda of needing her to fix his own internal sense of inadequacy or his loneliness. This freedom is the highest form of intimacy, a place where two souls can dance together without stepping on each other's toes. As you look at your own life, ask yourself if you are a partner or a parasite, feeding off the emotional energy of another to feel alive. If the thought of a day without contact fills you with dread, you have likely crossed the line from healthy love into dangerous enmeshment. It is time to start building your perimeter, to start sketching the lines of your own architecture, and to rediscover the person you used to be. Do not be afraid of the distance, for it is the very thing that will allow you to see the path back to the person you love most. The journey toward strategic detachment is a journey toward a more profound and authentic version of togetherness that few ever reach. It is the path of the warrior lover, one who is strong enough to stand alone and wise enough to choose to stand with someone else. Elias found his peace in the sketches he drew and the walks he took, and Sarah found her hero in the man who finally stood his ground. Their story is a testament to the fact that the strongest bridge is the one supported by two pillars that do not touch at the base. When we stop clinging, we start connecting, and when we stop needing, we finally begin to truly and deeply want the person beside us. This transformation is available to anyone willing to trade the comfort of the familiar for the growth of the autonomous self. Take a step back today and watch how the world and your partner begins to move toward you in response to your newfound strength. Your presence is a prize that should be earned through mutual respect and the maintenance of a healthy, vibrant individual identity. Never settle for being a shadow when you were born to be a light that illuminates the darkness of the world alongside another. The art of strategic detachment is the ultimate act of love, both for the person you are with and for the person you are becoming. If you found value in this deep dive into the psychology of modern relationships, make sure to subscribe to my channel Deep Mind Portal